Eric is walking his dog. Her name is Nova. They're moving through a park on an afternoon that feels like every other afternoon until a rabbit jumps out of a bush directly in front of them. Nova lunges. The leash rips from Eric's hand. She's gone, sprinting after the rabbit, disappearing around a corner before Eric can even shout her name. He chases her, but she's too fast. By the time he rounds the corner, there's nothing. No dog, no rabbit, just empty park stretching in three directions. He searches for hours, calls her name until his voice cracks, walks every path twice, then 3 times. Nothing. He goes home, puts up signs, notifies neighbors, posts online, calls shelters. His phone becomes something he checks every 30 seconds. A week goes by. Nova is still missing. Eric is devastated beyond comprehension. He keeps replaying it, the rabbit jumping out at exactly the wrong moment, his hand positioned just wrong on the leash, the angle, the timing, everything had to line up perfectly for this disaster to happen, and it did. Day 8. A woman shows up at Eric's front door. She has Nova. The reunion is chaotic. Nova jumps. Eric drops to his knees. There's relief so overwhelming it feels physical. Eric thanks the woman. She's around his age. She found Nova 3 blocks away, saw the tag, brought her home. They talk for a while. Her name is Vanessa. Over the next few weeks, they see each other several times. Coffee, dinner, long conversations. Things go well, really well. They start dating. Eric finds her gorgeous, kind, funny, intelligent, everything you'd want. 2 months later, they're in love. The relationship is everything you could reasonably hope a relationship to be. Eric thinks about how lucky he was, that Vanessa happened to be the person who found Nova, that she was in the right place at exactly the right time. If Nova hadn't run away, none of this would exist. A couple months pass. Eric is driving, on his way to pick up Vanessa, moving through an intersection on a green light. Then a car runs the red from the perpendicular street and hits him at full speed. T-bone, direct impact. Eric's car spins, 1,080 degrees of metal screaming and glass shattering. He's knocked unconscious. He wakes up in a hospital an hour later. A doctor explains what happened. Severe head injury. They need to run immediate tests. Brain scan. Check for permanent damage, internal bleeding. Eric is furious. He thinks about how unlucky this is that he was going to get Vanessa in that exact direction at that exact time. One random driver running one red light and his entire life might be destroyed. They keep him overnight. Next day, the doctor comes into Eric's room. "Eric, how we doing?" "Fine. A little fuzzy, I guess." "Yeah, I would certainly imagine. You took quite the hit." "Yeah." "So I've reviewed the CT scan and I have some bad news, but I also have some good news." Eric tenses. "Okay. I guess I'll take the bad news first." "Well, technically they're sort of the same piece of news." "What do you mean?" "The bad news is we found what appears to be a glioma in your brain." The doctor pauses. Eric looks at him, unaware of what this means. "It's a tumor." Eric's stomach drops. "The good news, though, is we found what appears to be a glioma in your brain." "What do you mean? How is that good news?" "This tumor has nothing to do with your accident. You actually got out of the accident relatively unharmed, but because of your accident, we ran the brain scan. Because of the brain scan, we found the tumor." The doctor continues. "Normally, we only catch a tumor like this after someone realizes something's wrong, when they start to feel the symptoms, which is almost always too late. Because we found the tumor right now, though, we caught it while it's still benign, before it became malignant and grew into any other areas of your brain, which would have almost certainly been fatal. Since it's still in this stage, we should be able to remove it almost entirely without issue." The doctor looks at Eric. "Eric, in a weird way, this car accident basically saved your life. So I guess, sort of good news disguised as bad news." Eric sits there. Something visceral is happening. Maybe it's the head injury. Maybe it's the emotion of the situation. Maybe it's the fact that the doctor just essentially said the same thing twice. But Eric experienced 2 totally different mental responses. Maybe it's everything. He looks around the room. He thinks about how lucky he was to have been going to get Vanessa in the exact direction at the exact time he was. He thinks about how lucky he was to have gotten in the car accident. He thinks about how strange it is to think this, for something so bad to be so good, for something so good to be so bad. Eric realizes how little he knows about what anything actually means, that he has never and can never know what exists on the other side of anything that happens to him or because of him, no matter how good or bad, lucky or unlucky, any of it might seem. He feels a paradoxical sense of helplessness and liberation. A week later, Eric undergoes brain surgery to remove the tumor. The surgery is successful. Eric is mostly as good as new, except for a scar running down the side of his scalp. Several days later, after being released from the hospital, Eric is at home with Vanessa, recovering. To get some fresh air, he takes Nova out for a walk. That story isn't interesting because it's unique. It's revealing something about reality most people never understand. Every time Eric made a judgment, Nova running away, meeting Vanessa, the car accident, he was doing something that feels natural, but is actually impossible. He was treating a middle like an ending. Think about what happened. Nova disappears. He immediately calls it, "This is the worst thing, horrible luck, wrong timing." Then Vanessa shows up. He recalculates instantly. Actually, this was the best thing. The universe put the right person in the right place. Then the accident. He recalculates again. This is catastrophic, life-destroying. Then the tumor discovery. One more flip. Wait. This accident just saved my life. Each time he was certain, completely certain he knew what the event meant. And each time he was wrong. Not because he wasn't thinking clearly, but because he was judging a single frame of a film that was still running. The chain was still moving. Consequences were still unfolding outward in directions he couldn't see. But his brain demanded a final verdict immediately. This is what we call the Nova effect, the inability to reliably judge whether something is good or bad in the moment, because outcomes unfold through chains of consequences no human mind can predict. And we all do this. Think about your own life for a second. How many times have you been absolutely certain something destroyed you, that a door closing was the end, that timing was wrong, that you were unlucky, and then later, sometimes months, sometimes years, you looked back and realized that thing you thought ruined everything actually pushed you somewhere you needed to go? Or the opposite, something you thought was your salvation, the breakthrough you fought for, turned out to be the setup for something you never saw coming. Now here's what most people don't understand about why this keeps happening. In the 1960s, a meteorologist at MIT named Edward Lorenz was running weather simulations on a computer. He reran the same model, but rounded one number, changed it from 0.506127 to just 0.506. A difference so small, it seemed meaningless. When he came back to check the results, the entire predicted weather pattern had changed, completely, dramatically. This became the foundation of something called chaos theory. Lorenz later posed a question that became famous. Does the flap of a butterfly's wings in Brazil set off a tornado in Texas? The answer is yes. Life operates exactly like Lorenz's weather model. A tiny event, a dog pulling a leash, a rabbit jumping at the wrong second, triggers a chain of consequences so large and so far-reaching that no human mind can trace them. The lost dog leads to meeting someone. Meeting someone leads to being in a specific car at a specific time. Being in that car leads to a scan. The scan finds something that would have killed him 6 months later. That's why you cannot reliably call something good or bad in the moment. You're too close to the beginning of the chain. The consequences are still forming. The story is still writing itself. You're judging the butterfly, but the tornado hasn't even formed yet. But here's what most people miss. You're not even judging the event itself. When something happens to you, you're not experiencing the event. You're experiencing one frozen frame of a film that's still running. The event hasn't finished, the chain hasn't stopped, but the human brain treats that single frame like it's the entire movie. Think about this carefully. You have never, not once in your entire life, reached the end of a chain. Every outcome you've ever experienced was just the beginning of another chain. The thing you thought was your lowest point became the ground another version of your life was built on. The door that closed pushed you toward something you couldn't see yet. But we don't judge it that way. We judge chapters like they're the whole book. We call something a tragedy, 30 minutes into a story that's still being written. Nobody would watch the first act of a film and write a final review. That would be absurd. But that's exactly what most people do with their life. Every single day, something happens. They freeze the frame. They demand to know what it means right now. They label it good, bad, lucky, unlucky, blessing, curse. And then they move forward, carrying that label like it's truth. But the film is still running, the chain is still extending, the consequences are still rippling outward in directions you haven't even looked yet. You're not judging the event, you're judging a snapshot of it. And snapshots lie. And this reveals where most human suffering actually comes from. Remember Eric in that hospital bed, furious about the accident. The crash was done. His body was mostly intact. The danger had already passed. But he was suffering, not from the event itself, from the label he put on it, the story he was telling himself about what it meant, what it would cost him, what it said about his luck, the future he thought was being destroyed in that moment. The event is one thing, the meaning you assign to it is a completely separate thing. And that second thing, the meaning, the label, the story, is often what causes the most pain. You don't just suffer from what happens to you. You suffer from your interpretation of what happens to you. And the interpretation is almost always premature. Think about the 3 a.m. version of a problem, the one that feels catastrophic in the dark, the one that convinces you everything is over. How often does that version turn out to be accurate? Almost never. The label you apply to an event in the first hours, when you're in shock, when you're afraid, when you can't see past the immediate pain, that label is the least accurate version of what the event actually is. But you carry it anyway. You torture yourself with it. You replay it. You build your next decisions around it. You're suffering from a verdict that isn't true yet. That may never be true. This is why certain people move through crisis differently. You've probably noticed this. There are certain people who, when something goes wrong, don't collapse the way most people do. They get quiet. They process. They move. They don't spiral into, why is this happening to me? They don't demand explanations. They don't torture themselves trying to figure out what it all means. It's not that they feel less. They feel everything. But somewhere, consciously or not, they've internalized what this pattern teaches. They've watched bad events transform into unexpected doorways enough times that they no longer fully trust their first read of a situation. They've developed what you could call a long view, the ability to hold space for the possibility that what looks like destruction right now is still righting itself. They're not searching for a reason, not forcing meaning onto the event, not trying to make sense of it immediately. They're just responding to what's actually here. Because they know the chain isn't finished yet. But most people do the opposite. They demand certainty where none exists. And that demand creates something dangerous. Think about the things in your life you're most sure about. The relationship that ended. You're certain it was wasted time. The opportunity that collapsed. You're certain it was pure loss. The year that broke you. You're certain it had no purpose. Now, notice something. Your certainty has nothing to do with how much information you actually have. Your certainty comes from how much emotional pain the event caused. The more something hurts, the more certain you are that it was simply bad, that it had no other possible outcome, that it meant exactly what it felt like in that moment. Pain creates the illusion of finality, but pain is not the end of the chain. Pain is just a signal that something significant happened. And significant events, the ones that actually shake your life, almost always have long chains. The things you are most sure were catastrophic are probably the ones with the most unfinished chain still moving beneath the surface, invisibly, quietly, in directions you haven't looked yet. Which brings us to what the people who actually understand this have figured out. Viktor Frankl survived Auschwitz. He watched people die who were physically capable of surviving, and he watched people survive who by every measure shouldn't have made it. The difference wasn't physical strength. It was whether they had created a reason to live beyond their suffering, a child waiting for them, an unfinished book, a person they loved. Frankl said, "Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances." He directly challenged the idea that everything happens for a reason, not by saying events are meaningless, but by saying meaning is not pre-installed in events. It's constructed afterward, through how you respond. The Stoics understood this 2,000 years ago. Epictetus, "You are not troubled by what happens, but by your beliefs about what happens." The event is neutral. It's your interpretation, your judgment, that creates the suffering or the meaning. Now, notice the people who actually live well. They're not the ones who figured out the chain. They're not the ones who found some grand explanation for why things happened. They're the ones who stopped demanding to understand the chain before they could move. They made a quiet decision, not to wait for meaning to reveal itself, but to keep walking inside the uncertainty, to respond well to whatever arrived, without needing a verdict on whether it was good or bad first. That's not passivity. That's one of the rarest forms of intelligence there is, because it requires you to act without the comfort of knowing the outcome, to keep searching for Nova without knowing if she's ever coming back, to keep moving towards something without knowing if it's a door or a wall. This pattern doesn't teach you that everything will work out. It teaches you that you cannot know if it will. And the only sane response to that is this: stop judging every arrival. Start responding to every arrival, because the chain only continues through you. Now tell me, what's one event you were absolutely certain destroyed you, that later turned out to be something completely different? Share your experience with me in the comments. Also, like this video, subscribe to the channel. This space is for people who choose to see reality clearly, even when it's uncomfortable.